Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Rye, School Board Chair. This workshop of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach is hereby convened at 4:01 p.m. on this 23rd day of February 2021. Pursuant to the state of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Governor's executive orders, the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, as amended by the Virginia General Assembly, and the school board's April 7th, 2020 emergency resolution, the school board and selected staff members will meet in person at the school administration building. However, at this time, it is impractical and unsafe to allow other persons to attend the school board meeting due to physical distancing and safety precautions related to the pandemic. Members of the public will be able to observe the school board meeting through live streaming on vbschools.com, broadcast on VBTV Channel 47, and on Zoom. It's the school board's protocol to break at 5:30 p.m. to prepare for the regular school board meeting to begin at 6 o'clock p.m. At 5:30, the school board will conclude its formal meeting unless the board votes to continue the informal meeting until 4:45. Madam Clerk, will you please announce those school board members in attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In school board chambers, we have Chairwoman Rye, Ms. Melnick, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Felton, Ms. Franklin, Ms. Hughes, Ms. Riggs, and Ms. Weems. Attending via Zoom is Ms. Holtz, Ms. Manning, and Ms. Owens.
All right, and would our members participating via Zoom indicate where they're Zooming in from?
Ms. Holtz, what is your location?
We understand she's in the building, is that correct?
Yes, for the record, Madam Chair, she is in room 113, and I can
Okay.
see her.
And our other two members? I don't know, who was that, Madam Clerk?
That was
Jessica Owens. I'm present. I saw a message from Ms. Manning saying that the volume is going in and out for her.
All right, and we're just asking you to share where you're Zooming, where your location is.
Oh, okay. I am zooming from my home.
Thank you. And Mrs. Manning? All right, if we're having some,
Sorry, volume that was going in and out, I hear you now.
okay.
What do you need to know?
Just for the record, location, Zoom location.
I'm in Virginia Beach.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to school board admin matters and reports. And a few quick matters. With Madam Clerk today, we have interest form. I emailed in advance about the upcoming NSBA conference. This is the National School Board Association, a virtual conference, April 8th through 10th. And if you could kindly indicate on the interest form at some point this afternoon or evening with our clerk, your interest level, if it's a yes, a maybe, a no. There is a group discount possibility, and that's why, and there is an early bird sign-up deadline of this Friday. So it would just help to have an initial rough idea. And with the virtual option, there is more flexibility. It does overlap a little with spring break. It's that Thursday through Saturday, but these sessions would remain available online for access for those who are officially signed up. So any of you can talk further to me or our clerk about it after this evening with further questions. Okay. And I do want to bring up just in general, the matter of our committee reports and to convey just a friendly reminder to keep them as efficient as possible, to keep our meeting moving. With regard to that, it was Mrs. Manning who made a note that when it comes to our official agenda item, it's characterized as standing committee reports, but as you're all aware, traditionally, it's included the liaison assignments that most of you have as well. And the description, it does say school board members appointed to represent the school board on committees or boards may briefly present updates on the work of their committee or board. That's in Appendix B. And so it's my suggestion, barring any objection, that this just be referred to policy committee for probably what's a pretty easy fix with language, assuming that that is the intent of board members to continue with the liaison reports as well. Does anybody care to comment on that at this time? Okay. So that brings us to, is there anybody else with any admin matters to share, colleagues? Okay then. So we'll get to this next order of business, and this is the two new committees, another 6-month assessment, and each of the committees is allotted 5 minutes. This was to be a retreat topic, and again, you'll all recall that we needed the time for the another topic that extended over, so we're trying to address that at this point, Mrs. Weems and I. So, Mrs. Weems, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you. I'm reporting as chair of the PPMC Planning and Performance Monitoring Committee. Mrs. Holtz and Ms. Felton are on the committee with me. And so I would love for them to chime in if they have anything to add. But basically, we kind of call this the budget committee for short sometimes, because basically we have 2 tasks. And one was budget overview, and the other is program monitoring and evaluations. So for the last 6 months, of course, the budget part is pretty much well seen. We started out with our committee went over the reversion resolutions with Farrell before it came to the board. Also, we were briefed on both of the federal CARES Acts. And then the superintendent's estimate of needs, we called all of our colleagues and got feedback so that we could direct Farrell and Dr. Spence before he came to us with his budget. And of course, we all know that the majority of us put compensation as number 1 for the feedback. So that's pretty much the budget side of it. And now the other side is kind of performance monitoring, evaluations of our programs. The last 6 months, we have reviewed and helped with PBIS program evaluation, the student response team evaluation, the academy at Kempsville High School, the Entrepreneurship and Business Academy evaluation, the college readiness assessments, the strategic framework updates, the Schoology update, the innovation charter, the digital learning evaluation update, and English as a second language program evaluation. So as you know, it comes to us, and then we kind of advise the administration, yes, we need to bring it before the whole board, or can you maybe go into more detail on this section because we didn't understand it, and we ask them questions to kind of help them to be able to have a good workshop that would answer everybody's questions. So that's kind of what I see as our purpose. So again, I want to thank Mark Bergen. Special thanks to Susan Kipe. She does a great job in keeping us in line. And then also to Dottie and Sharon. I think it's an effective committee, especially on the budget side. I would like to, maybe hear some feedback from Dr. Spence and Mark Bergen or Lisa Bannicky on the other performance monitoring, because that one's not as readily seen, I guess. And so to maybe get their feedback on that part as well. But I'd like to turn it over to Sharon and Dottie to see if they have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weems. Sharon Felton speaking at this time. You spoke well to all of the things that we are doing, and I must say that the PPM has been a committee that has allowed more transparency with the school board members. And from the feedback that we get after going through a meeting and taking the information back to them, I think that the response is most efficient, that they can address those things. But I'd say that the committee is doing well, and thank you, Chair Weems, for all the work that you've done. Not a lot to say, but just thank you for sharing that and what's having this committee. Thank you.
Do you want to ask Dottie if she?
Ms. Holtz, do you have anything to add?
Mrs. Holtz, just your opportunity now, if you care to add anything to the PPM report from Mrs. Weems.
I have no comments.
All right, then. Thank you. And for the benefit of the public, these are two committees that are in their second year now. So we just felt it prudent as a board to, similar to new division programs, to just do these 6-month assessments of these two new committees. So that's the purpose today. So now I'll ask Madam Clerk, switching over to Governance Committee. So when we had our retreat last summer, this was what was shared as what was on the horizon for last fall, essentially. Well, July through December of 2020. And I'll quickly go through the list and just for everybody's purposes, the letters in italics, those just relate back to this. There's about a dozen committee responsibilities under this committee description. So this is just to affirm that the work that is going on does tie in with the charge of the committee. So for those who are so inclined afterwards can go back and match them up. So the ongoing norms and protocols assessment and revival of a protocol manual. So that was a priority at the time. And important work was done with that, and it was presented at the retreat. More on that in a moment. Revisiting complaint procedures, that's an acknowledged committee function. It's one that remains pending. Committee procedures, standardization. With the help of our school board attorney, Mrs. Linetti, we have a really helpful committee procedures document now that's actually part of the new protocols manual. And it does further put all the committees in alignment in terms of expectations and duties, whether with regard to the chair or the committees themselves. In terms of everything from public notification to other responsibilities of the chair with regard to new members. It's just a really good working document. Superintendent evaluation, a big priority this fall was the mid-year evaluation, and there was I think a statement that was drafted to affirm the purpose of the superintendent mid-year checkpoint, and so that was accomplished. Related matters we'll touch on in a moment. And then the school board mini retreat was, the committee helped to guide it was less involved than a full-blown retreat, but the committee did help guide the evolution and the planning of that, which did take place in January. And finally, for this list, the school board self-evaluation process, which when we get to the next slide, we'll be able to share more where we're at with that. So the final slide, this is now the 6-month work plan for January through June of this year. So one pending item, because school board training does come under the purview of this committee as well, so we want to acknowledge that by providing feedback from the VSBA conference that a number of us attended. Again, it was a virtual conference. This again is deferred from the retreat, so this will be an item for the next workshop in March, and then we'll be all caught up with our deferred retreat items. So I'll be reaching out to those of you about that, who are involved with that. The Norms and Protocols Manual, so with the mini retreat session, follow-up included continuation of any necessary bylaw updates, and and other issues that were brought forward that were discussed in a follow-up session. So there is a finalized version being prepared, incorporating some of the final feedback from board members, and that will be presented in the near future for school board approval. Bylaw 128 is mentioned here specifically. It's actually on for tonight as an action item agenda, but and Mrs. Linetti later will point out some of the other revisions, but the one pertinent to this is that we are adding, at the request of some of our colleagues, an additional charge of the committee, and we tweak some of the wording, and establish protocols and procedures subject to review by the school board regarding school board meetings and other matters relating to the school board. So there was a need to add that as an extra committee role, and so that is among the items, among the revisions for that bylaw tonight. This is COVID school board meeting formats, ongoing assessment. This again is to acknowledge that we do continue to assess these meetings and the formats, and in person and virtual, who's in person and who's virtual, whether with regard to us, with regard to speakers. So that's an ongoing subject that the committee provides direction on and advice to the full board. And the last two, the superintendent's summative performance evaluation, there's still a piece of the instrument to be finalized concerning the weighting of the standards. So that's acknowledged here, and that will be done this spring. And then finally, the board self-evaluation, which is an expectation of the VSBA. And we have two committee members, Mrs. Melnick and Mrs. Anderson, who have offered to kind of take this on with some initial investigation assessment, and they'll be coming back to us as a committee with certain proposals, and we'll be sharing those with you as we receive those. So that's where we're at, and I want to acknowledge our other two members, Mrs. Weems, and our newest committee member, Mrs. Melnick. And again, please let us know what we can do anything else we can do to support this full board. That's another point I wanted to make. And do any of my committee members have any follow-up comments? Or any? So again, please reach out to us once you get a chance to digest this further with any questions. All right then, thank you all. So that brings us to the budget part of the workshop. And are we starting again this evening with CIP?
We're gonna start. It's really both. It's the whole thing together. We're gonna talk about balancing the budget and the SUN, and then as we do, just a time frame reminder as Mr. Honziker is walking up to the podium here. So our intention, and again, this works backwards from City Council getting this and then having to have their opportunity to review it and discuss it, and then ultimately adopt it, is to have this adopted at a meeting that's scheduled for next week. So as you deliberate on this tonight and ask your questions, we are asking that the board get to a place where we're fairly clear on where we're going from here. Mr. Hansiker can talk about the work that has to happen between here and next week to prepare the final product for your adoption. So, we will want to take as much time as we need to tonight to get to that place. And of course, as we've done in the past with these workshops, if we need to carry over other workshops to the end of the formal meeting, we're prepared to do that. Okay? Mr. Hansiker?
Okay, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Rye, Chairwoman, Vice Chairwoman Melnick, school board members, Dr. Spence. You see on the screen the agenda for the workshop. It's a very abbreviated agenda, and that's purposeful because we want the majority of the time spent with you actually leading the discussion amongst yourself about what you ultimately are going to indicate to us as a balanced budget by the end of the evening, if you will. If you'll go to the next slide. We changed our process for this workshop in that we've been sending you the questions or requests for information that you've made and our responses. We've been sending those to you since last week. I think we had the majority of the requests come in before the end of the week, and then we had I think a couple or three since last week and some yesterday, and a clarification on one today that Dr. Spence sent with a chart. So we've also provided to the school board a printed copy of what we sent to you last week and this week. So we wanted you to have all this stuff in advance. It didn't make any sense to wait until tonight and give you the questions and the responses tonight when we need a decision from you really today. So hopefully us responding to you and sending this stuff out ahead of time has been helpful as you've tried to evaluate and look and come up with your own thoughts about how to balance the budget. So I think before we go to the next agenda item, we'll just stop right there. I don't intend to do this over again. In the past meetings, I've read the questions and our responses, but you've had them. So if there's any clarification that you need or other questions related to what has been asked of us that we've responded to, we're certainly open to any of those inquiries or questions or requests.
So the question on the floor now is any follow-up questions to the replies that have been provided in the past week, correct, Mr. Hunsaker?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, apparently not. Okay.
Okay, well, that's good. Let's go to the next slide. This slide, probably the most important one of the night. And basically, it is the superintendent's estimate of needs recommendations on one page. And you've seen this before. It's in the budget document. It was in the superintendent's estimate of needs presentation that we made to you back the first part of February. And it indicates the projections of the revenues that we're projecting to receive next year comparing to the revenues for this year. And any variances, either a decrease or increase. And it also has a spending plan on the last half of this page. And what the spending plan does, it comes to a balanced budget. So this is the superintendent's recommendation. We would hope that the school board would support this recommendation. We think it's the best budget that we've been able to present to you in many, many, many years. And I go all the way back to 2006, and it is absolutely the best one. One of the reasons is because it's the largest amount of increase probably that we've received in any of those years, and that's for various reasons. With the exception of the revenue to balance the budget that comes out of the special revenue fund, the $5.3 million that you've been whittling down from $15 million, and now next year it would be down to $5.3 million. All of the rest of those revenues are not one-time money. It's ongoing sources of revenue for future years. So that's a very, very important point that I wanted to make to you. So that's the balanced budget. And probably I don't really have any other presentations to make to you. We've tried to position for tonight with providing all this information to you ahead of time to prepare you to give us your final recommendation about a balanced budget. And obviously, it will need to be coming from a majority of you. We hope there would be a consensus from you on what that budget will be. We don't have the final state budget. The conference committee is still working. So we don't have that information. We're not sure when we're going to get that information. The calculation tool, which is what we normally get from the state, we still don't have that. That tool will just detail what the Senate and what the House budget is and how that compares to the governor's budget. We don't have that yet either. So there is a possibility, a real possibility, that after you approve a budget next Tuesday, we may have to come back between then and before the city adopts a budget ordinance, not later than May the 15th, and amend what you're going to come up with next Tuesday. So it would be unrealistic to think that what we're presenting is going to be the final budget because we don't have the House and the Senate budget yet. So we don't have a final budget from the state. So having said that, there's no real process for this. I think, Chairwoman Rye, it would be you leading the board in a discussion of any changes to what we've presented to you.
Yes, sir. Well, Dr. Spence, do you have any comments before we open it up for questions or school board comments?
No, ma'am. As Mr. Hansaker indicated, our interest is in letting you all sort of have a conversation, lead the conversation about where you want to go with this.
Right, Mrs. Manning, you can start us off.
Thank you. So I know I ask this question every week, and I know we have not had the answer to the question, but I'm going to ask it one more time to see if we have the indication as to, and it's a two-part question. Do we have any indication, the proposal of the city manager to city council regarding what their salary increase recommendation is going to be for city employees? And the second part to that question is, I've been on the board now for 4 years to approve budgets, and I don't recall us ever giving a different amount than city council. Many of you have been around longer than I have. Can someone tell me when the last time was we gave a different or a higher amount than city council has given?
Is the question that we've given a
Madam Chair, can I put you on pause for just 1 second? We're having an issue with the Zoom being heard through the broadcast.
All right.
Just give me one moment, please.
Okay, to the public, a very short break to resolve a Zoom issue.
Thanks.
Please bear with us. We are resuming our workshop setting at 4:41 PM. It's been shared that our TV viewers cannot hear our Zoom participants, so I, as chair, will repeat their questions. And that's how we will proceed until we can get this figured out. So with that, we will start again with Mrs. Manning.
So are you asking me to repeat my question?
Yes,
or-
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, so that we can repeat it.
Okay. So my question was, have you yet gotten any indication as to what city council is proposing as a raise for their employees? And then the second part was, when was the school board gave a higher raise?
Yes, okay, so for the public, Mrs. Manning has put forward the question of, is staff aware of the city proposed raise for city council staff at this point in time? And second, what is the what is the historical record of any difference in raises in the recent past?
The historical record is, we don't have an apples to apples comparison. We have a record, but it's not apples to apples. So I can't speak to that. We would have to see if we can get that. We can't get that updated in any kind of quick fashion. I do recall one year when the school board's raise was more than the city's raise was. And I'm not aware, other than there was a year, because the city in some years gave a merit raise, where they gave a merit raise in addition to what everybody else got. And that raise wasn't given to all city employees. It was only given to a select number. That's all I'm aware of right now. We had years where we had 5 years that we had to do the same thing. That's the city and the schools, because we were both dealing with the VRS offset. And we handled those 5 years exactly how each one of us did the raises, with the exception of the year that the city did, in addition, a merit raise. That's the best I can do right now.
Mrs. Manning? Any follow-up to that?
Well, I just didn't get, in case, and maybe I missed it, but do we typically at this point, we have an indication of what city council is going to be proposing for their employee raises? Do we have any indication yet?
I don't have an update on that. We have starting to develop the budget, and at that time, we were both thinking that we were going to try to do around a 3%, and that was before we had a chance to analyze the governor's budget and get further along in the process. The city's way behind us in their budget development. We'll really probably be the first group of any city departments, if you will. And we're not a department, but we're a big part of the city budget that will present a budget to the city when you vote on March the 2nd.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson, and then Mrs. Weems.
First of all, I want to point out to everyone that our employees did not receive any raise last year, so a 5% raise this year would be really over 2 years. So it's not like we're doing something out of the ordinary. if we really wanted to keep up with what we've done in the past 5 or 6 years, we ought to be giving a 6% raise, because that would be 3% last year and 3% this year, and that's what we've normally been doing, about a 3% raise. So if city council wants to say something about us giving a 5%, I think we need to point out that, you know, this is really over 2 years. I believe it was about 10 years ago, in 2011-12, when the city gave a 3% raise, and the school system gave a 2.5, and we were upset about it. And when we went to city council and said something to them, their response to us was, "You didn't ask." So we're asking, and we're asking the public to go with us. And I'm not trying to be, you know, cruel or mean about this. It's just that, you know, as I said, we did not get a raise last year, and our employees deserve it. They worked hard. We've been through a lot of circumstances where our teachers have had to learn a whole new curve of teaching. So, and, you know, everybody's had a tough year. I get that. But I will stand and defend that 5.5% raise this year, and I'll do it happily. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Weems.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Okay.
It's just a
Mr.
quick,
Hunziker.
just a quick reminder, and I told you this last week. The Senate and the House budget bills differ in terms of the amount of the raise that they're proposing. One's proposing 3, one's proposing 5. I suspect it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 5. In the past, when the state has provided raises, not one time, but raises, whatever that raise was, if a school division weren't able to say that the average raise for employees were, let's say it's 4%, those school divisions couldn't draw down that state money. We don't know if that kind of specific restriction will be in the final budget bill, but I'm saying that's a possibility. So right now, it could be anywhere from 3 to 5, and more than likely, they typically meet in the middle. But I just thought I'd share that because we don't know where that's going to go right now.
Okay, Mrs. Weems.
Yes, thank you. Of course, there's no law that says we have to, match the city or that they have to match us, but I've been on the board since 2002, and the vast majority of the time, we're really darn close. And that's just fact. Yeah, you can go back in 2011 and find one time that they gave more, but we're usually pretty close. And the reason, which it didn't happen this year, and I'm not sure why, is usually our leadership meets with their leadership, and you come back and say, we kind of think they're going this route, and we've had in the past where our leadership has come back and said, well, they're going this route, we want to go this route, but if we do, they might take some of our money away, just all different scenarios. And for some reason, we didn't get that meeting this year. I'm not faulting our leadership, I'm not faulting them, it just didn't happen. Because usually we do have some sort of indication this right before we vote, obviously about where they're heading and what ballpark figure that they're talking about. So that kind of puts us at a disadvantage. But you're right, there's nothing that says that we can't give more. But in the last 18 years, it's been close, if not the exact, almost virtually every time. I know that we had emails from Ms. Anderson and Ms. Manning, and I'm assuming by the email string that Ms. Anderson's fine with holding her ideas, because I think that your ideas, Ms. Anderson's ideas, have a lot of merit, and I would like to discuss them. If we're going to hold off till summer, that's fine. I'd like to hear, though, any conversation from Ms. Manning, because I think Ms. Manning's proposal was actually to give teachers a little bit more because of what the teachers have had to go through, especially having to teach, those teachers that teach virtually and in person. So do either one of you want to comment so that we can discuss on that, or are y'all just holding it till later?
Mrs., well, do you want to defer right now? Okay, you go ahead then. All right, Mrs. Anderson, Mrs. Manning.
So, okay, I get it. So one of the things that I asked administration to consider, was that, I would like to see, an incentive built into our teacher scale, the salary scale for our teachers. And I basically feel that, you know, it would be a way of showing that we place educators and their experience in the classroom, that we value that. And so I'll kind of read what I asked for. I said, in providing, I would like to see a 1%, these are just considerations, through providing a 1% increase instead of a 0.5 increase at years 5, 10, 15, or 20, for example. Teachers would feel that teaching were a career, not a job. And I asked for the costs associated with a 1% increase at years 5, 10, 15, or 20. Also the cost of a 1% at year 5 only and a 1% increase at year 10 only. So I asked administration to consider these things and to give us a rundown. And I realized that, my response that I got back from, Mr. Hunziker was that, you know, they needed time, obviously, to consider some scenarios on this. And I spoke to Dr. Spence about it even this morning. And so their response was that they felt like these were some ideas that we might consider in the future. But that right now, with the money that we have currently, it might cause compression, major compression within the scale. And so that is something that we also have to think about and deal with if this happens. I would like us to consider it. I think it's something that merits a lot of discussion, this summer at our retreat. And that will give, the budget department time to come up with different scenarios. Either putting in a bump at year 5, figuring out where these incentives would be. I feel like teachers need incentives. We are losing a lot of teachers at the 5 and 6 and 7 year range. And so what I want to see is I want to see us have incentives to keep teachers in the profession. And this would be a way of helping to, instill a little higher teacher scale down the road. So I'm willing to wait for us to have the discussion at our summer retreat and see different scenarios that our administration can come up with, so that they can figure out a way and how much it would cost. I mean, whether we have the money or not, we need to figure out how much it would cost. What are we looking at down the road, and is it viable? Is it possible to do this? So yes, I'm willing to wait until summer to have a major discussion about this. In the meantime, I'm still in favor of the 5% raise for everyone at this time.
Okay, thank you. I just thought that was important to, kind of discuss, briefly, and I look forward to the discussion this summer. I did read the emails, and my concern with that would be the major compression, because we spent years and years, and how many years, Farrell, to try to fix that? But this is a new board, and compression may not be a bad thing for new board members. Some people get really bad heartburn over compression, some don't, but we just spent a lot of time fixing that compression issue. I forgot how many years it took, but I remember that. So major compression to me is not a good thing. But I look forward to the conversation this summer. Thank you.
It looks like Mr. Hunziker wants to weigh in again.
Not weighing in, just to clarify, and it did take us years to overcome the compression, and we're still working on that, especially at the front end of the scale, the 0 to 10 to 15 years. there's still some. In Ms. Anderson, we did run a scenario, and there was great compression at year 5 and year 10. So the thing that you have to remember going forward in whatever comes out of the retreat, let's just say there's a scenario that we adjust. Let's just say that there's a scenario that we adjust at 5 years, 1%, and maybe 2% at 10 years, and 3% at 15 years, and 4% at 20 years. And each one of those increments at 5 years, everybody 5 and 10 would get the additional 1. At 10 years, you do 2%, so everybody at 10 to 15 would get 4%. So the key to this is whatever the average increase is in that adjusted, modified salary scale is going to have to be what you can guarantee that you could fund every year. Remember, that's why we set the step increase at 0.5%, because we relatively certain that we could always fund 0.5%. But if you wind up with a 4 or a 5% result of changing the teacher scale, that's the minimum that you have to give every year. And that typically hasn't been historically our ability to do. So this is just for a future conversation, but I want you to understand when we start playing with these scenarios, we have to think of the long range and can it be done in the future. Sorry.
Okay, I believe part 2 to this, Mrs. Weems' question was posed to Mrs. Manning. Do you want to repeat it, or?
Well, I just know that,
Okay.
okay.
Ms. Weems.
And no, I just wanted some conversation. I mean, this is budget conversation. I know that you
Yeah.
and Ms. Anderson had sent this email, so I would like to.
And we'll paraphrase, we'll paraphrase for you once you, just go ahead and then we'll repeat.
Okay, so.
Yeah, so I've been talking all along that I think that that I'm an advocate of of giving a higher percentage or more to our teachers. Because, as in the superintendent's letter in the beginning of the superintendent's estimate of needs, it mentions teacher pay several times, and the importance and everything that our teachers have had to do, and how they've had to just really reinvent how they're teaching right now. And so I do think that there's merit to giving our teachers more than our other employees. And that was, I'm sure that everyone saw my request to get information for a 3% across the board raise for all employees, which I think in today's market and the situation that's going on in our country, I think a 3% raise is more than most people anywhere is getting. So I think that's very generous. And then on top of that, give an additional 2.5%. And I understand the compression concerns. But my personal opinion is I don't mind if there's compression. If a 30-year teacher is making more than an assistant principal, to me, that is not an important factor to just completely throw out giving our teachers more money. So that's my way of thinking on that. And if we did that, the calculations that we did, there would be almost $2.5 million left over to be able to deal with some of our unmet needs that we have, paying our teacher assistants more money, paying our bus drivers more money, in addition to already some of the unmet needs that we're chipping away at. So that's how I look at it, and how I think that we can reward our teachers who have been working really hard and doing so much, and just reinventing the way that they're teaching our students.
So, Mrs. Manning, would you wrap up your proposal for us? And by the way, for you and the public, we're back on board with all our viewers, and so that's good news.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question, Ms. Rye.
If you could restate what you're proposing.
Yeah, so a 3% raise across the board for all employees and an additional 2.5%. And that 3% I'm suggesting, just like the administration's doing, 2.5% in the form of a cost of living adjustment plus a 0.5% step increase. And then an additional 2.5% increase for teachers, those on the teacher scale. And then using the additional money, 2.5%. And I'm flexible on, and would like to have a conversation of how we would spend that additional money on which unmet needs, because we have a lot of them. But I think paying our teacher assistants more is kind of up high on my priority list. Completing our advancement of pay, our bus drivers, increasing their, I believe, in front of me, and then also maybe utilizing some of the money for additional duty supplements.
So do any of these enclosures, excuse me, Farrell, does your packet address it all, or Mrs. Manning, do you have the figure of what the difference in the total is, to know what the difference is?
I don't have it in front of me, Farrell may, but it was in the response to the administration. I think it was 2.38 something. So around 2.4 million would have been the balance left over to address unmet needs.
Do any of my colleagues care to comment on that? Mrs. Melnick? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so everybody would, with this, everybody would get 3%, and then the additional 2.5 would just go for those with a teaching license or instructional. Is it instructional? Is that what it's called, Farrell, I guess? Anybody on the instructional? Yeah, okay. So with what we have left over, Farrell, that approximately 2.5 million, if we go through here and do upgrade the teacher assistants, well, that's 5 million. I'm just trying to think that if we.
No, that was 555,000 on that one line item, Queens.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, I'm not.
The difference is 2,379,000.
Okay.
That's how much.
I'm just trying to figure out if we use the remaining of that to help with, the bus drivers, the clerical position, the additional duty supplements. Would they be getting, how much less would these people be getting than if we went with the 5.5% across the board? I mean, I guess you can't.
Well, they would be getting a 3%. In her proposal, everybody would get 3.
Well, they'd be getting 2.5%, but then if she wants to use some of this money, but then if we use some of this money.
The money that she's talking about is the difference between her proposal, which is 25,469,000, and the difference in 27,846,000. That's 2,379,000 available
Right,
to use for the unmet needs things.
right. So if we use some of that, say we use some of it for this line item that says upgrade bus drivers. Well, obviously, if we upgrade the bus drivers, they're going to be getting more money.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, if you take that, how much more money versus the 2.5% that will be taken away?
We would have to run the numbers because we would have to see how, John, are you here?
Yeah, see, to me, I need to I need to
don't know if
somehow
we can- I don't know
if
if
we're
we-
gonna take 2.5% away from these groups, but yet we're helping these same groups and unmet needs, what is the difference here? Is it 200 less a year? Is it, you know, that's what I need
I'm
to,
not
Right.
understanding.
I do.
Okay.
Hold on one sec.
Okay.
I do.
okay, can you, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Let me, if I could speak to it. I know what you're saying. What you're saying is, and I think we have to be specific rather than be broad, because you're being broad, but I think you
Right,
mean to
we-
be specific.
Yeah,
If you look on page, the rest of the board members, on page 25 at the unmet needs
right,
of your budget document. And you look under those unmet needs, what Farrell's telling you is you have something akin to, what'd you say that number was, Farrell?
2,000,003.
2.3.
Yeah.
Let's just round it to 2.3 for the sake of ease here. 2.3 million that would be saved under Mrs. Manning's proposal
correct.
of not giving all employees the same increase. And if you applied that 2.3 to the unmet needs,
Right.
and you mentioned specifically bus drivers and clerical. So you're roughly then at 2 million, just under 2 million. And so you have something like 350,000 remaining if you were to do those two, which you really couldn't do much else in the unmet needs with that amount. So if we just said, if you did those two, clerical position upgrade, and that's only identified clerical positions. That was only how many positions, John, for clerical out of the total group? Do you remember top of head?
Do you have it in here, Phil? I don't.
So just to be clear, that's not all clerical positions. That's a subset of all clerical positions that was based on a market analysis. Bus drivers would be all bus drivers to a thing. So what we could do is pause here, get Farrell's group, if you wanted to,
About 1,200, 1,300.
12,
Clerical.
1,300 clerical positions?
Yes.
Yeah, so it'd be 12 or 1,300 of your clerical
Said it right.
folks.
No, that's teachers.
And then you, talking about all bus drivers, you could figure out, what you're asking is what kind of raise is that for that group and for those people? And how is that relative to the 2-3%? And we can do that. If we need to do that, we can pause. Farrell's team, we can take a 15-minute recess and he can give us an estimate how much time it would take for them to run that number of moving all bus drivers to a grade U10. What kind of raise on average might that be for bus drivers? Could we figure that out? I would imagine, because it's an hourly. But it's going to take a while, so we're going to have to go on a recess if we want to do that. That said, let me also layer in the additional complication here. If you're only talking about clerical and bus drivers, I want to remind the board that we sent, and so I want to make sure everybody's understanding what you're asking, the unified scale and the alphabetical positions on the unified scale. There are a lot of positions that are not clerical and a lot of positions that are not bus drivers on that scale. So to be specific about those groups, 0% additional increase for those groups. So you're only talking about in this group, in terms of the unmets, the bus drivers and the clerical. So I do want to at least make sure we're being clear about that piece of it. But if you wanted to know the specific raise for clerical or bus drivers, if you were able to go back and attack those two positions, which was in essence those two unmet needs in and of themselves as kind of categorical positions would take up most of the 2.3, you could put a little more in advanced degrees, or you could put a little bit more in the early commitment. You can't do and here's what I'm going to explain to you. You can't do the allowance for teacher assistants that hold a bachelor's. We already differentiate for teachers assistants that hold a bachelor's. You would only do that line item if you also did the $5 million line item of moving all teacher assistants to grade U10. Those two really should be listed together, because the reason to give the additional allowance for teachers assistants who hold a bachelor's is if all other teachers assistants were at the same pay grade, to differentiate between having a bachelor's and not having a bachelor's. Does that make sense? So you should list those two together. You wouldn't do that one alone. So, again, if it's helpful to pause and get you a kind of rough estimate of, on average, what might the raise be for those two groups who would be impacted by those two sets of unmet needs, we could. You're going to not touch, so it's going to be 0 additional for the remainder of the positions listed on the unified scale that aren't bus drivers or clerical positions. So that's a significant number of those positions. And so since I'm trying to answer your question, I'll just take the opportunity to remind you, that was the reason last week when we were discussing this, administration did not support that recommendation because we felt like you're going to leave a lot of people off the scale doing that.
Okay. Okay, well, I mean, I'm just one board member. If nobody else wants it, I mean,
But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how long it would take us. But, Farrell and I talked about this ahead of time, that if you all needed an answer to something and we didn't have the answer to, his team's here, we would just need to put a
Can I
go on recess.
clarify? I want to make sure, because I texted Judy, called her. We're talking about if we move the bus drivers up, what total percent raise will they get for moving them up? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Approximate average.
Approximate
She's working
average
on it.
raise to upgrade, if you upgraded all bus drivers to grade U10,
Right,
one of the unmet needs.
right.
And same question for the upgrading of the identified clerical positions that were below market.
Okay. I know we could do the bus drivers that she's working on. I'm going to go down and talk to her. She's watching right now.
Okay.
I'll run down there, confirm, and I'll come back.
In meantime, we have 5 members in the queue that we can proceed with that might add some clarity to where we're at as a board. So Mrs. Melnick, then Miss Owens.
So I'd like to remind my colleagues that Mr. Honsiker started this conversation with, they are incredibly pleased with the budget that they have presented. And that we were able to meet a lot of our needs this time, which makes everybody happy. But I also want you to be mindful of a couple of things. We don't always get what we need or deserve from the state. And unfortunately, it always falls on localities to plug in that money and to compensate our employees properly. And we really have the opportunity to make a difference this year for all of our employees. I want everyone also to be mindful of the fact that we're 37th in the nation in salaries. We're further down that list when we take out Northern Virginia. I'd like everyone to think about what we have been through the last year. And not only our teachers, but actually, I can tell you, 365 positions totaling 4,791 employees. The 4,791 employees, we would be sending a message this time after this year that we don't value them as much as we do the teachers. And I'm an educator by trade, but there's no way I would want to take a raise as a teacher over everybody else that has chipped in and pitched in. And I would not want to go to work looking at my psychologist friends, teacher assistants, physical therapists, custodians, cafeteria, behavior intervention specialists, all of the administration, everybody in this building, and the other 4,791 employees that they deserve to be valued right now. And we have the opportunity to give this time, and that is what I'll be voting for everyone who that's been riding out this storm together, and that's what I'd like to see. You can run the numbers. I personally am not interested in that. I'd like to see every single one of our employees compensated properly, mostly because we are rarely in this position. Since I've been on the board, we've never been able to offer this type of salary increase, and everybody is deserving, and regardless of city council's approval or disapproval, I think it's imperative that we move forward that way. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, Miss Ms. Owens, and then Mrs. Franklin.
Thank you. I won't, kind of belabor, Ms. Melnick's points, but, I agree that while obviously our teachers have worked really hard and have had to learn all kinds of new ways to teach and engage and to, continue to do what they do in all kinds of different formats, so has everybody else, is basically where I'm at. Our school counselors have still been working this time, and they've had to learn how to do it differently and how to do it virtually and in person in the different ways. What we see, school counselors on our needs of budget list that they are going to be, the department heads will be addressed. But our mental health team is even bigger and broader than just our professional school counselors. We have our psychologists, we have our school social workers. And I think if we're saying that one of the big drivers for getting our kids back in school right now is mental health, we need to make sure that all of our mental health providers who are taking on a more expansive role than they ever have before and in different ways than they've ever had to do it before deserve just the same amount of raise as our teachers who are going out of their way to do something that they've never had to do before. We're getting so much push that obviously our special education students can't really get the same level of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy at home. And yet all of those therapists are still working and have been having to find new ways to reach those students, and will continue to have to do it both to our virtual students and our in-person students. They deserve the same across the board raise as everybody else. Our nurses, our custodial staff, our cafeteria staff who've had to be in the building doing a different way of serving lunches and handling food through this whole pandemic. The whole summer is the school year. So all that to say, for this year, I would be in favor of us making sure that all of our employees, every one of them, knows that they are appreciated the same and that it's reflected in how we're paying them across the board. So that's my thought. I'm okay with hearing the other numbers, but again, kind of like Ms. Melnick said, for me, it doesn't matter so much what those other numbers say for me. I would like to see everybody get a raise across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Spence?
Yes, ma'am. And I think it was clarified in Ms. Owens' comments, but I also want to make sure the board is talking about precisely what the board thinks it's talking about. So I want to make sure when we reference these scales, we talk about it sometimes as like the teacher scale and then the unified scale. And I want you to remember it's an instructional scale. It is more than teachers, and that's the number we've given you. So we haven't given you just teachers because we didn't separate out. It's difficult if you go look at that list to separate out just teachers from other folks who do teaching like roles, like coaches and people who are in buildings like PALS instructors who are different than teach, that sort of thing. So I want to make sure we're talking about the instructional scale and then the unified scale, which we broke out for you into 3 categories because we also sometimes refer to people as classified employees. And so we got a good question from Ms. Owens about is classified on the unified scale, and it is. And there are professional employees on the unified scale as a separate category, and then there are administrative employees on the unified scale as a separate category. So we actually put those into 3 categories for you there too, just so you had a sense of, we want to make sure we use the right language when we're talking about what you're proposing. We don't want to run into a situation where we think we're giving just teachers a raise, but you're giving everybody on the instructional scale an additional compensation increase. And then if you're saying everybody else besides teachers, my assumption means you're not talking about other people on the instructional scale, you're talking about everybody on the unified scale. I just want to target the language, make sure we're all talking about the same thing, if that helps. And if you have questions about that, we can certainly talk to that.
Thank you. All right, Mrs. Franklin and then Mrs. Riggs.
I actually have a question for either Dr. Spencer or Mr. Hunsaker, which, by the way, Mr. Hunsaker, I really appreciate your time that you spent with me and rookie trying to help me understand this week. But I wanted to ask you guys, so on the unmet needs, we have the teachers' assistants and we've got the bus drivers listed on those unmet needs specifically. Is that because there is a real difficulty in getting those people hired, or how did they specifically get on that unmet needs? And I apologize because I know for the rest of the board, this is probably.
Yeah, actually, Mr. Muir can talk about it a little bit, but generally speaking, it's about market analysis on specific work groups, right? The teacher assistant was a little different, not so much about market analysis, but more about how we leverage our teacher assistants and the different specializations that our teacher assistants do. And so we place them on different scales. For example, if you're a special education, not different scales, different pay grades. If you're a special education teacher assistant, you're on a different pay grade than somebody who's a general teacher assistant. And our recommendation through HR to try to clean that up a little bit and give our principals more flexibility with teacher assistant staff was to put them all on the same pay grade. And then we have another pay grade differentiator for teacher assistants who have a bachelor's degree. And so the idea was to get them all into the same pay grade and then have an additional allowance for teacher assistants with a bachelor's degree to reflect that difference, that primary difference between the two sets of teaching assistants that we have. But then everybody else becomes a little more flexible in placement inside of a building on a year-to-year basis. Does that make sense? So that's why teacher assistants are listed as an unmet need. Bus drivers are listed as an unmet need because we want to continue to bring them up to market.
Okay, so with that said, because it seems like the unmet needs list has kind of been pushed, I guess maybe from year to year just due to budgetary restraints. Is this something that if we can't do it this year, what is the reality of us being able to meet that in the future? And I know that, I apologize.
So no, you're fine. The answer is we take bites out of that apple every year. So this year we included some items that if you looked at last year's estimate of needs, you would see them, and they're now actually included in the budget balancing document. So what you have up there, which for ease of reference is also on page 24. And if you look in the budget balancing section of that chart, you're going to see upgrade school counseling department chairs. That was previously listed as an unmet need, something that has been requested by the school counseling department chairs at the recommendation of HR as well, to differentiate their pay from other counselors, essentially, for some additional work that they do. And you'll also see moving all custodians up one pay grade at the cost of $1.4 million. That had been another listed as unmet need to account for market adjustment that we thought was needed. So we actually brought that one over and put it in. It was a choice we were making about which one of those, and our recommendation based on our senior leadership's assessment of which one of those were priorities at that moment. But any one of these, basically the answer is you take a bite out of that apple when you can. Obviously, the biggest cost on there is the teacher assistant cost. So and I heard several people say that's a priority, that's certainly something we could prioritize in the next budget, and that could be part of the next year's budget conversation. We go into retreat typically every summer, Mrs. Franklin, and that first part of that, or every time we have a retreat, a key part of that conversation is what are this coming year's budget development priorities. And so that'd be an opportunity for the board to say, we really want you to look again at the teacher assistants from the unmet need list. We put that in our list of budget priorities. When we went back to the PPMC this year, we also typically have a meeting in October and reaffirm budget priorities. And then when we went back at the beginning of the budget development process with the PPMC, we went through what we heard were the budget priorities and affirmed those with the PPMC. And then we began to develop the budget from there. Then we presented what we thought we were going to do. And you all got phone calls and they said, this is what they're proposing to do. And asked for, is that targeting your priorities the right way? So that's kind of how the process works in terms of how we might tackle it in a future year.
Because I have to be honest with you, it's amazing how many people I know in all these different professions. And when I talk to teachers who we all agree deserve to get a raise, it's funny because when I ask them would they want to, take a high raise at maybe the expense of someone else, they don't want to. And I talked to others in other occupations, and they said, yes, the teachers deserve a raise. They all support each other. And honestly, to me, it's hard to look at somebody and say that you're not as valued. To be quite honest, I don't know that I feel comfortable saying that I think that one person deserves, especially when you're talking to them directly and saying, I think that maybe they deserve more of a raise. And I somewhat agree with the fact, obviously, we would all love to give the teachers a higher raise. I agree with that. But it's funny when you're actually talking to these different groups, they all think that everyone does a great job. And the more people that I meet in the VP CPS family, I think that every one of us, not us, but every person, every employee, has a value to our little family here. So I just wanted to make sure that we did have a situation and that we could look at those in the future in case we had the ability to do that. So, okay.
Absolutely. That's actually why we create that list, so that we know we need to work off that list.
Okay, but I'm looking at the time and we have Mrs. Riggs in the queue, the only one who has not spoken, who's in the present queue. So if this is quick, Mr. Hunziker.
It's related to her question. Also on that unmet needs list, we've separated by one-time and ongoing expense. So there are one-time items in there that we may be able to address before another budget year. We will have some money at the end of this year that before the end of the year we might be able to address some of these one. And then we have reversion monies from this current year that will flow, that we'll ask the city council to reappropriate. That's another time we could look at one time. So just
Okay, you'll have to get back with me on that one.
No, and that was an important point to make. Thank you. Mrs.
For the record, Madam Chair, I just wanted Mrs. Manning to know that she still is in the queue along with Mrs. Weems, but Mrs. Riggs is first, and yeah, we'll have to probably get back to it.
I'm not going to belabor it, but you said you wanted to hear from the rest of us, and so I just wanted to reiterate what Ms. Melnick said and what Ms. Owen said. I agree with, and also what Ms. Franklin said. I think that everyone is valued, and we need to show that value to all of them. I would not want to give more to one group than the other side. And I am very appreciative of Mr. Hunsaker's and Dr. Spence and everyone, and Mr. Mira, all of your hard work. I know that as Mr. Hunsaker said, he is very, very careful, and he does not recommend something that he doesn't think is viable and that we can do. And so for him to get his approval on this, I think says a lot. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So clearly, I think we still need more time to conclude this, and given the hour, which is just about 5:30, it's my recommendation that we resume this discussion with the plan updates to follow agenda item 17 of the workshop, and we'll note that at the time of the formal meeting agenda adoption. So barring any objection, and again, for the public purposes of the public, the formal meeting will resume at 6 o'clock, and this school board workshop, the formal meeting will commence at 6 o'clock, and this school board workshop will resume at the conclusion of the formal meeting. So with that, this workshop is adjourned.